Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. Physical theatre company Gecko, based in Ipswich, was founded in 2001 by Amit Lahav, who is still its artistic director 22 years later. The company's latest production, Kin, has been touring the UK in 2023 and will end up on the stage of the Lyttelton at the National Theatre in January 2024. Kin began with the story of Amit's grandmother, Leah, and her journey from Yemen to Palestine as a child in 1932. I asked him what was Leah's story and why did she make this journey?
If I could just before launching into Leah's story, just say that I think that it would be clearer maybe to say that was the provocative beginning of my thinking and research into broader ideas about all of the migration stories that have led to me existing, but then all of the migration stories that I then uncovered within the ensemble, among the performers, and through everyone I met over the 2 years of thinking about researching and exploring the idea. So it was most certainly the fire was lit in a conversation with her in 2017 when I went to ask her about that journey. So I thought I'd just load that up by saying that. And in terms of the details of that story and that journey, it's extremely patchy and sketchy. And when I asked her about this, she was approximately 90. I don't know exactly how old she is because she's never known her age. I would guess around 90. And she was certainly entering into stages of dementia. So it was difficult to have the conversation. But I also spoke to historians and other people, family members, to try to patch together a picture of this journey. You're talking about a community of Yemenite Jews in Yemen, in a town or city called Aden, in the north of Yemen. You're talking about a very primitive and poor community where nothing's recorded, nothing's written down. As I say, they don't necessarily even log their birth dates. And if you're lucky, it's written on a door somewhere, on a door sill, and you can refer, oh yeah, there you go. That's when you were born. And in terms of why and how, it's not completely simplistic, other than progressively Jews were moved out of Yemen. There was definitely a growing sense of persecution and a need to get out of the country, which escalated more in the 40s and 50s with historically mapped journeys out of Yemen, and a lot of those Yemenite Jews headed for Israel. For Leah, for Safta is the Hebrew word for grandmother. She was always Safta to me. Safta left earlier than that. So this was in the 30s that the family travelled across down Yemen. It was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometres. It would have been all on foot. If you were not completely and totally poor, you would have had a donkey. From what I could understand, I don't think they did. And it would have been a long journey, and she would have been a child. Maybe 4, 5, and not everyone survived. From what I can understand, not everyone survived the journey. And they would have been heading for the port in Yemen, Aden, to get on a ship. And there would have been all sorts of complexities and difficulties in that city. I think was British ruled by that time. The city was British ruled, Aden, to get on a ship to Palestine. And so it would have been Palestine at that time, and that's where they would have been heading. So, and I don't have a clear picture of how long the journey was. It may have been several months to make that. It may have been more, it may have been a couple of years, I don't know. Very, very long way, 600-700 kilometres on foot with children and old people, and, so a long voyage to get out of the country.
It's an amazing story, but it's one that's becoming very familiar to us now. These sorts of stories are in the news, and they're meeting with perhaps not the level of persecution that we saw in Europe in the 1930s, but they're certainly meeting with hostile reception, aren't they?
Most certainly, yeah, absolutely. It's a painful and complex journey that so many people are making, and for all sorts of complex and difficult reasons. And climate change will be one that will drive those figures up exponentially over the next few years and decades.
So what prompted you to actually do this story now? Why is it? Because it seems relevant to today's world, or was there something that made it urgent for you at this moment?
I think initially, it's an ongoing life fascination. I think for me, it's something that I've always been fascinated by. Having started the company just over 20 years ago, I think I've always been drawn to work with people that have other cultures, tertiary cultures, as I do, and have a relationship to other languages, spoken languages, and other cultures. It's always been something that has been at the heart of the work, at the heart of the research. Having been born in another country and having been surrounded by other languages, I think it's just something that is part of who I am, and something that has always fascinated me. I know from the very early days of making work, I was never interested in using English and spoken language to be the central form of communication. It never interested me for that to be the dynamic of the work. It always interested me to have a complex of languages, and in so doing, drive the audience to seek a deeper connection with what's going on stage. So that being the case, I think there's probably an inevitability about going very sort of pointedly into, well, where am I now, and when I look at my family and my ancestors, what leads to this point? And I think I've always found that a fascinating and beautiful celebratory idea, that we are all the subject of migration stories, every single one of us, and that's just, that's something that I've always loved, even in speaking to people that really don't know what that story is. They have no way to connect with it. It's there, and it begs deeper research and questions. You end up talking to your grandparents and asking and trying to research those questions. So it was always waiting to come out. And I think in speaking to my grandmother, I think that provoked me to then talk to and think about all the other migration stories that I know of in my family, of which there are many.
This is a personal story, obviously, but it's a devised production. You're down as creator, not the writer, and the director, of course. So what do you bring to rehearsals, and what's the process then with the other actors? Initially and very specifically, I don't know what we're going to be making, and I don't know what the world is. I don't know anything about it. I know that initially I have to have a kind of a very personal connection to something, and to have a sense of its profundity in terms of the range with which that feeling or subject matter or idea could be pushed and stretched and explored. So in terms of a process, the initial explosion of ideas comes from stretching and pushing questions about migration and the stories that exist in the room as far as I can in every direction. I really am stretching that out. So I'm listening, I'm provoking, eliciting in every direction. I'm asking very personal questions of the ensemble. I mean, literally asking questions, but also asking physical questions of the space, and we really are going at it in every way. So home, you're starting to talk about home and and the kind of detail of what home was like, mapping it physically in the space. Let's build your home, Vanessa. Let's really have a look at it. Let's go through some beats of your upbringing and what that felt like and looked like. And let's just go into it. Let's explore that. Let's talk about racism and the feelings that
you had when you were kicked out at Heathrow. What did that feel like? Let's go into it. So we really are exploring everyone's stories in a deep and rich way, just to uncover a broad map of all of those feelings. And then we're exploring things in very poetic ways as well. So it's not literally this story explored and exposed in a literal narrative way. Sometimes it's a felt, dynamic, poetic exploration.
So your job as the director, I suppose, is to arrange all of these stories from all the different people and to find a path through it that the audience can follow, is it?
Yeah, of course. I am the writer. I am the provoker in the room. I'm staying connected to the initial feelings that I had at the beginning, and I'm taking on board. I'm talking about over the course of 2 years. I'm taking on board everything that's happening in the room, and I'm trying to shape something. So that's all of the stories that are in the room, but steering a course through that is a poetic language which potentially has nothing to do with what's happening, if you like, narratively in the room. It's something that's emerging. It's a poetic idea that is emerging that I'm starting to hook things to. I'm starting to steer a course through. For example, when we were making The Wedding, we were, if you like, the central feeling was actually feeling disengaged and angry that my connection to the state at the time, I felt dispossessed of connection to that. This is the build up to Brexit. Brexit hadn't happened, but the build up to that, the build up to all those feelings was there. Human rights were being altered and tampered with in terms of those details. And really, there was a core question of, well, hold on a minute, what's my contract here? And why are you tampering with it? My contract with you, the state. And so some of these questions were in the room, feeling dispossessed of that, losing agency with that. That's the core feeling, anger, but also hope. Now, how do you get to wedding? Well, I feel wedded to the state, but actually what I'm really curious about is a divorce. How can I explore a divorce here? So the idea of a wedding starts to emerge in the space. It is a leap. It's a poetic leap that happens in the space, which doesn't necessarily come from questions about that are happening in the space. It happens inside of me at some point. I'd like to know more about weddings and also what it feels like to be wedded to something that you don't want to be wedded to. So there is a leap that happens there, and I don't really know how it happens, actually. I can't really describe that. It happens like a bolt of lightning, a dream, waking up with it, comes out of meditation, it just emerges, and then we go down that route for a bit.
You don't know what it is, but you know it when you see it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's almost like you have. I sometimes think of it like you've put a call out into your brain and into your psyche and into your subconscious. You've put a call out to say, I need something that encapsulates all these things. Could you give me some results? Could you fire up through dreams and through poetry? Could you fire something up for me to work with here? And your unconscious pings you a message. That's the best I can do.
It sounds a fascinating process, but it's a much longer process than working with a scripted piece, isn't it? I mean, how long did you have? You said it was 2 years overall. How long did you have of that where you were actually working with the other actors, devisers?
Well, yeah. I mean, I call it a 4-year process. It's a 4-year process. There's an initial year where I'm trying to find that central seed. I'm trying to locate that. There's a kind of initial year where I call it a thinking, feeling year. I do residencies, workshops with lots of different people, and I'm trying to locate what that central feeling is. Then I have 2 years with ensemble, with the performers, Gecko performers, ensemble performers, where I'm really researching that. And in terms of actual time in the studio, I don't really know what it would be. 20 weeks, I don't know. But it's concerted periods in the studio and it's concerted periods out of the studio. And both are very important to the process. I need time to reflect on what we've been researching, to draw, to dream, to think, and then come back afresh to research again. Eventually, some point in that second year, which is the third year overall, I start to build and make something like a 20-minute piece. I tend to get rid of all of that piece that I've made, and I start again, and I make a 25-minute piece. And when I say I make a 25-minute piece, it's a draft which is choreographed. It's got costumes, makeup, it's got sound design, composition, staging, props, furniture, and a mock set. And I tend to get rid of nearly all of that second piece, but a little bit remains. And then I make a 30-minute piece, and then make a 35-minute piece. It really goes like that, draft after it. But essentially, if you think about it, if you were writing a piece of theatre, you would make a draft, and the only draft that I can make is a full piece because there's nothing to write down. The draft that you would get in a play, the script is shared with the lighting, the choreography, the sound and music, the staging, the design. That they are equally sharing the role of script. And I have to make all of it to know what the draft is. Without doing that, I'm sort of just, I'm kind of, it won't tell me anything about what it is, because a Gecko show and world is so designerly and so visceral and physical. It's really nothing like a play. It really is a totally different form. So, it's complex, and that's why it takes so long.
Yeah, this is what's sometimes referred to as total theatre, isn't it? You talk about the words not being the primary source, like Arto would have said, that all these other, the physical, the visual, all these other aspects, the sound, are all just as important. But I noticed you also said once about words, because of the way politicians use them, aren't something we can trust anymore either. So is there a political dimension to the style that you work in as well?
I mean, I think let's just start wide on that question, okay, and then zoom in to the end of it. I think that broadly speaking, that I want to get to the truth of what's happening moment by moment on the stage. And I think that the holistic nature of what you're seeing and feeling, I think, allows you to connect with, in a human sense, or even in a mammalian or animal sense, to connect with what you feel is true. And the stripping away of words and what you're hearing, and the computation of whether or not what you're hearing you believe. In a way, it's more complex, but it's more sort of streamlined to truth. From what I've discovered and played with, there's a streamlining to what's true about that. And I think I think that's happened over 20 years, that I feel that I can streamline to truth, to the heart of the matter, quite literally, in a more clear way. I think it's also more complex in some ways, and you can wrong foot. Maybe that's not quite the right way to put it, but if things really don't line up and you don't have the time to put that together and really strip away things and get to the heart of it, that can be complex. You can lose people somehow as well. So it's a difficult thing to achieve, because you really are relying on the audience interpreting what's happening on stage through the physicality and gesture of the performers. You've got someone that's speaking Malayalam to someone who's speaking Norwegian, and you're saying, don't worry about that. Don't worry about those linguistically, what's happening here. Gesturally, we know what's happening, or gesturally, we know enough about what's happening to pass over the authorship to you and say, that's okay. You can now fill in around that, what's happening there, and that's intended that will happen. And I think, in terms of the politics of that dimension, I sort of think that with a small p, that it is all political, and that there is something about truth which is entirely political as well. That we are in a battle about truth. I think in society there is a real battle about that. Something that has been violently stolen, violently kind of arrested, and in which we are manipulated constantly, politically, but also commercially. So I do feel it as the role of artists and intellectuals, teachers, poets, to be constantly trying to steer a course as clean as possible, a passage of truth, and so there is, to me, that is a political objective, if you like. The raison d'etre for being an artist is truth, and therefore an endlessly political one too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And a story about migration in the world today can't really avoid it being political, because it's in the news about the boats crossing, and they've just read the last couple of days about Nigel Farage might come back into politics to make sure it's a subject for the next election. So you've got to acknowledge that it's a controversial political hot topic at the moment, haven't you?
Yeah, and I really, really don't have to worry about that in some ways, in that I didn't start the process thinking, what do I need to do to chase the line of what's hotly topical? Yeah. I don't need to think about that. I just need to go with truth here, and really, hand on heart, the feeling that this is really a piece about empathy and empathizing with human beings everywhere is fundamentally actually the central feeling that I have about this. It is joyful for me to think empathically about human beings in every situation. I know it myself personally. I know it, but I know it in every moment of my life too, and I know it with the ensemble, and I know it when we're engaging with thousands of people in the audience. I feel it from the audience. They connect with it. They truly connect with it. So yeah, it's like when you get down to it, every human being knows this and feels this. But yeah, I completely hear you. It's in another dimension when you're sitting in front of the news, where you're ingesting that on a day-to-day basis. It feels controversial. It feels hotly contested. I don't feel that in the audience, and in the audience there is in a Gecko audience you have school children and teachers, and you know in every single performance, and that to me is a battle that is won in every performance, because they don't know why they're going there or how they're wound up at a Gecko show, some of them, and that to me is an important aspect of the shows. There are always young people in the room.
Yeah. And it could be their first experience of theatre possibly as well, which is quite a responsibility for you, isn't it?
It's massive. It's massive. I feel that, and I take that as an enormous responsibility.
This is moving to the Lyttelton at the National, which is a huge stage. Have you had to adapt to that space?
When we started to really get into the nitty-gritty of the staging and the set, you know, Reese is the designer. We knew that it was going to end up at the Lyttelton, and so we always had it in mind. Reese has done an amazing job in creating a kind of concertinerable, a word not often used, a concertinerable staging which allows it to stretch out and get very wide. And so, yeah, we were at the Barbican last year, I think it was, with the wedding, and a Gecko show has a really epic, an epic visual dimension to it. I think it works very well on the big stage. It kind of works, in some ways it's the best because it's pictorially so big and thematically so epic that the canvas can take it and almost demands it. It's cool being intimate and up close. We can make sense of that too, but I do feel like when you have a stage like the Lyttelton is a wide and big stage, but the audience is super close too, so it can handle that. I think I think it will be at its best at the Lyttelton.
Yeah. You've transferred a couple of your shows recently to film as well, which is a very different medium. But from what I've seen, you've made the most of the medium as well. It's not just a filmed stage production. You've adapted to it. So what was that process like for you?
Oh, I absolutely loved that. Absolutely loved it. I mean, it was, it was. I think there was some core things to get right and to nail. Especially with writing a screenplay based on Institute, the stage show. And I think I felt it quite quickly, what needed to happen there. And in essence, I think I didn't want the camera to do too much. I didn't want the camera to be too busy. The performances are very physical and dynamic and emotional. So I wanted to shoot it as a drama, with sort of set up shots and then really narrative camera work, actually. 2-shot, reverse shot, close up, super close up, back to a set up shot. Really, really sort of drama narrative camera work, and let the performances do the magic. And I think because of how versatile it is to work with camera and to think about the journey of the audience through camera shots, and the possibility to cut to a place that you can see and feel on the camera. Part of the challenge was, how are we going to keep the spaces that we see on camera poetic as well? Because it would be very tempting to cut to a corridor in some sort of institution. And to make that corridor a very real, tangible corridor space. Whereas in the stage show, you're suggesting a corridor, you're suggesting certain places and spaces, and you're asking the audience to imagine a lot, and you're using lighting to create corridors and shapes and spaces. With a camera, you're going to cut to a place. And so the potential is you start to get too narrative driven with the shots and the camera and the design. So the game is to try to allow the audience to still do a lot of work. So those were the things that I had to think about and contend with when I wrote the screenplay. But I loved it. I think very shot kind of very dynamically when I'm making shows. I think very shot based, and I think with lighting in mind all the time. Or at least I think very architecturally, this is how I see the space. I don't see anything else for this scene other than what we're seeing here. So there won't be, I know immediately there won't be lighting on any other part of the stage. We'll just be very zoomed in and focused here on these two faces. So I think in terms of shots a lot anyway. So I found it quite a straightforward transition to think in terms of camera shots.
Yeah.
And I really loved it. And I'm looking forward to the next piece. If anyone out there wants to commission.
I remember I once read that Bob Fosse in his early days, there was a piece that he choreographed that was being filmed for television. And after he saw it, he was horrified that the camera was never where he would have put it. And he vowed to keep that control. For anything that was ever filmed, he would make sure he had the control. And I can see you've kept that control, but it seems to be an extension to what you do on stage anyway, because you have that whole vision, and this is just extending it further, I suppose, is it?
Yeah, it is. Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And I completely understand Bob's horror there. You're controlling the space because with a Gecko show, you don't have the script. Yeah. You don't have words. And so you're generously inviting the audience to go. You're free to imagine this moment. So you're not controlling the audience's narrative journey. But if you don't control the image, you really actually, what you do is you create the potential of being really unmoored and totally in an abstract space. Well, that's not the game. The game is to create a window of clarity and say, off you go, fill this frame. But yeah, you're not saying this is totally abstract, anything's possible. That's not really the game. You're saying within the signposts of this world, let your mind go. So it's a give and take of generosity within a certain space.
And you said before that you started Gecko 21 years ago, is it 22 years ago? How has it changed, do you think, in that time? How has it developed? Is it still the same vision?
Do you know, I think it kind of is. I think it kind of is. I obviously have changed a lot in that time, and confidence is an enormous thing. Confidence to be able to express yourself and know how to work with people in a deeper and deeper way, to be constantly open-hearted and to give people a constant sense of value is a real joy in a space and in a room. That to me is always been a joy, and to develop that over time has been a joy has been a joyful experience. I think in the very beginning, I had no money to make anything, but actually it still took me years to make something, because I started in those days with not knowing what I was making at the beginning. That's not a negative thing. That's just the process. And it's the same thing. The process still is an evolving organic process. I knew at the very beginning, even when I had no money, that I needed the very best ingredients. And I knew that this was a kind of, if you're going to make a meal that is deep, rich, and sumptuous with every course, you need phenomenal ingredients to do that. You can't. So I knew I needed the best performers, the best actors, designers, creators, and that was the same at the beginning. I just had to use a lot more charm to get them in the room. Actually, I don't know if that's true. It's still the same. It's you're still charming people into the room based on not knowing much about what you're about to start on, based on relationships. It's about relationships. It was then, it is now. It's about excellence. It was then and it is now. The process is similar in some ways. Yeah, I sort of feel it's very similar, actually. I have more skill now, and I can take people on a journey, say more when I need to and say a lot less when I need to, maybe, but kind of the same.
Yeah.
is the short answer.
Yeah, and of course now you've got a reputation that can take you to the National Theatre.
Yeah, and that's all about charm as well, because when I sat with Rufus and said, I want to make this show, I couldn't really say what it was going to be, but that is reputation as well. That's the kind of reputation to say, okay, well, this is quality is synonymous with the work that Gecko make, and that's a really important part of it for the National and Rufus to trust that a beautiful, elegant, and complex thing is going to emerge. I feel really proud about that. Yeah. Very proud.
So what's next for this show after the National? Has it got a future? And what's next for Gecko?
Yeah. Ordinarily, I would say that after touring in the UK with the show and having gone through the first year of touring, which we have just done, which is a very transformative year always for a Gecko show, in that I tour the show, I really adapt and evolve and develop the show, and then it tours and I evolve and adapt and develop the show. We've been through that. We're gonna play at the National for a run. ordinarily it would be inevitable that the show would start to tour internationally. We've definitely come out of the biggest dip in the company's history. Obviously, COVID has changed the landscape. I think Brexit has as well. But it looks like we will be touring internationally. And so that's, I hope, what happens next, if, all being well. And yeah, we are working on some more UK touring and some European touring, not just with Kin, which is wonderful. We're working on a big project, which I can't talk about too much now. Sorry about that. But that will be announced in the new year, which is exciting. Working in the UK. Yeah, working on some. Yeah, we'll say more about that in the new year. But it's a very busy time. Our ensemble are working across lots of different participatory projects, delivering workshops. We're part of the national curriculum, so working with A-level students on devising, on making and creating, continuing to do residencies with professional artists as well. Yeah, it looks to be busier than ever in lots of ways. And if we're touring the work that we have, I'm a very happy person. If we're making new work, I'm happy. And all those things seem to be true. Running alongside all of that, we're opening a building in Ipswich, which is where we're based. And that building will be a creative space for making new work. And yeah, that's massively a part of the dream, because making, as we've spoken about a lot in this conversation, is a long and organic, difficult, complex process. And the environment that you have to make in is so fundamental to that, allowing you to feel safe and supported, but also allowing you to feel that you can be chaotic and explosive and random and challenge everything constantly. So having a space where you can make and build and be technical is really, that is very much a part of the dream. So the fact that we're doing that, and that's been a long journey to get to this point with Ipswich Borough Council, with the Arts Council, is enormous and awesome.
That was Amit Lahav, creator and director of Kin from Gecko, which will be in the Lyttelton at the National Theatre in London from the 12th to the 27th of January 2024. For more details and tickets, see www.nationaltheatre.org.uk, or for more information on Gecko in general, see www.geckotheatre.com. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.